The greatest threat to Iran is no longer U.S. missiles. The Tran regime is being dragged into a complex deadlock in the Strait of Hormuz, one created by the Revolutionary Guards themselves. No major power in history has ever been wiped off the historical stage simply because it was besieged from the outside. True destruction occurs when the state is dragged into a self-destructive internal chaos. Today, the streets of Tran are witnessing a serious test of this historic transformation. From the outside, the state may appear to be resisting the U.S. blockade in the Strait of Hormuz, but in reality, the system has internally transformed into a structure that consumes its own fabric. Because the strait has not merely served as a shield against external powers, it has become a tool specifically used to weaken the power of the civilian government within. Surprising but true, because the key figures exercising control over the Iranian government have begun to change. And this profound transformation is taking place not at the ballot box, but in the shadow of the Iranian Revolutionary Guards behind closed doors. The country's official institutions have been stripped of their authority one by one. Decisions are now made by the command structure of the Revolutionary Guards, who use the Strait of Hormuz as a strategic bargaining chip against the U.S. The familiar civilian regime in Thrawn has effectively been sidelined in the negotiation process by this hardline uniformed group. The influence of President Masoud Peshkan, or Parliament Speaker Bagher Ghaliba, over Iran's fate has significantly diminished. A military structure consisting of just 3 people and operating behind the scenes is attempting to seize full control. This military group is reshaping both the country's present and future according to its own strategic vision. Revolutionary Guards Commander Vahidi stands out as the absolute ruler of this new era. A single word falling from his lips can now instantly trash all the decisions made by the Iranian parliament. The absence of IRGC Navy Commander Alireza Tangseri, who was killed in an Israeli strike last month, has further consolidated this boundless power of Vahidi. National Security Council Secretary Zolgadar and military advisor Mohsen Rezai are the other key figures of this radical structure. This tripartite alliance is dragging Iran step by step into the very center of an irreversible regional crisis. Even Mojtaba Hami tried to mediate between these two wings, but his authority has been completely shattered. This tension between the Thrawn civilian administration and the military wing has turned into a fierce power struggle behind closed doors. The political wing of the regime is incredibly disturbed by this situation and is in a state of panic. For this reason, the officials in Thrawn are making surprising breakthroughs aimed at overshadowing the IRGC's ruthless stance. One of them is Speaker of the Parliament Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf. The Speaker of the Parliament recently described this radical structure within his own state as hardline factions that will destabilize Iran. This leaked confession that Ghalibaf made to his advisors proves how deep the crack within the regime is. The Speaker of Parliament of a state accuses the commanders of his own army of destroying the country. This is the most painful and clearest document of a modern state's internal collapse. In contrast, hardliners like Said Jali are using state television almost like a weapon. They launch a new wave of propaganda every day to poison public perception. Furthermore, Iran's hardline military wing incites the public with this media power and instantly declares any kind of diplomatic initiative as high treason. At the highest echelons of the regime's civilian administration, things have become much more pathetic. The reason for this is that the IRGC wants to use the Strait of Hormuz as leverage against the U.S. and make the actual decisions instead of the throne regime. Even Foreign Minister Abbas Iraqi might now be sitting in his seat with the constant thought of being dismissed at any moment. The state's top diplomat seems to be working while fearing his own army rather than foreign enemies. In fact, while the Thrawn regime seeks diplomatic avenues for a ceasefire, the Speaker of Parliament now openly voices his desperation. Ghalib says that they rejected the 15-point U.S. plan brought by Pakistan, but are ready to negotiate the 10-point plan on the table. This statement shows that the civilian administration is practically scrambling to reach an agreement with the U.S. They are trying to play the last remaining diplomatic cards in their hands to save the country from completely tumbling over the cliff. However, these diplomatic scrambles of the civilian administration crash into that cold military wall of the Revolutionary Guards and are shattered to pieces. The Revolutionary Guards ruined those critical negotiations planned under Pakistan's mediation before they even started, because for them, the negotiation table is not seen as a solution, but as a realm of surrender resorted to by the weak. If you recall, on April 17th, Foreign Minister Iraqi took a very critical step to reassure the international community. He had officially announced to the world that the Strait of Hormuz was fully open to all commercial ships. This announcement had allowed the markets to take a deep breath and caused hopes to flourish that the crisis would be resolved. But just one day later, on the morning of April 18th, everything was turned upside down. Disregarding the civilian administration, the Revolutionary Guards put the strait under a deadly blockade. Once again, the IRGC took that promise Iraqi made in the international arena and trampled it right in front of the whole world. Thus, they proved to everyone that TAN actually has no power or authority in foreign policy. The picture was quite clear. The SEPA Navy is turning those shallow and narrow waters of the strait into a minefield. Thousands of fast attack craft known as the Mosquito Fleet are setting sail to take global trade hostage. These small but deadly boats are waging a frustrating asymmetric war against massive ocean vessels. This is no ordinary naval blockade. It has become practically a naval guerrilla war involving more than 3,000 Siraj I and Zulfikar-class boats. Meanwhile, Gadir-class stealth submarines silently lay drifting mines into the narrowest passages of the strait in the dead of night. Tactical unmanned aerial vehicles, UAVs, in the sky, and shore-based defense systems are actively deployed. The Revolutionary Guards were completely sabotaging the process by turning Hormuz into an impassable military hell. However, this aggressive stance of the IRGC serves no purpose other than overturning the negotiation table in Pakistan from the inside. The Thran administration, on the other hand, wants to reverse this suicidal course as soon as possible. Civilian politicians intend to reach an agreement with the US at any cost to prevent the collapse of the state because those massive ports, the lifeblood of Iran, have now become completely non-functional. Those regions where trade once flowed have now turned into abandoned ghost towns. Cranes in the ports have begun to rust, while thousands of workers have started waiting idly on the streets. Oil revenue, seen as Iran's lifeline, has been severely shaken. That blockade of steel enforced by the US is suffocating all kinds of commercial activity. Thran has desperately lost even the billions of dollars in revenue coming from its greatest savior, China. The Iranian economy has been dragged into a massive cash crisis like never before in its history. Neighboring and developing countries like Iraq in particular are feeling the shockwaves of this blockade twice as hard as wealthy nations. While the physical oil market is pricing in a real blockade, the paper markets are desperately chasing after every ceasefire rumor. Iran's oil storage facilities are now filled to the brim. There is not a single empty barrel left to store the produced oil. According to experts' data, Iran has only 10 to 15 days left before it is forced to shut down its own oil wells. Shutting down an oil well means that facility being technically paralyzed and the economy coming to a standstill. We are talking about a country that was exporting 1.85 million barrels of oil a day before the strait was closed. That country, which was earning $150 million in cash daily, is now practically dying on the verge of bankruptcy. In other words, the Iranian Revolutionary Guards are practically setting hundreds of millions of dollars on fire every 24 hours, just out of stubbornness. However, the figures at the head of the IRGC do not care the slightest bit about this collapsing economy. The lost billions of dollars in damage do not even matter to the military elites. They continue to play power games completely isolated in their underground bunkers and risk all global trade in the Strait of Hormuz. The IRGC is merely trying to dictate their own radical ideologies and their never-ending military tutelage. Meanwhile, highly remarkable signals are coming from the Washington front. Trump even cracked open a diplomatic door, suggesting they could lift the blockade. The US president surprised everyone by suddenly adding a negotiation option alongside his maximum pressure strategy. Trump even personally went in front of the cameras and gave a very clear message. If a breakthrough is achieved, I am ready to talk directly with top Iranian leaders, he said. While the civilian administration in Thran wants to grab onto this lifeline extended by Trump, the military wing is attacking to break that hand in Hormuz. Moreover, the sneaky plans of the Revolutionary Guards are not limited only to Hormuz. They are even using uranium stockpiles as a dangerous weapon to undermine the civilian government. That enriched uranium accumulated for years has now turned into an instrument of blackmail, not against the US, but against the civilian government. Guarded by the IRGC, the 440-kilogram stockpile of 60% enriched uranium sitting right in the middle of the table and likened to a ticking time bomb is one of the foundations of the agreement terms. But Quds force commander Esmail Khani and his team strongly opposed this stockpile being given to a third country or being diluted. Trump had announced that Iran agreed to give up uranium enrichment. This news was like the light at the end of the tunnel for the civilian government. It was a unique opportunity for embargoes to be lifted and hot money to flow back into the country. But that suffocating behind-the-scenes pressure of the IRGC kicked in immediately. President Pezeshkian was forced to step in front of the cameras and deny this agreement. The president of his own country had to walk back his words in front of the whole world by the force of his own army. It sounds like a joke, but it's real. To weaken Throne's hand and break the nuclear consensus with the US, the IRGC is deliberately poisoning the process. They ruthlessly kick and overturn any table where the civilian government has a possibility of reaching an agreement with the US. However, these reckless tactics of the IRGC have now completely exhausted Washington's patience. The United States is not remaining silent against these dangerous blackmails of the Revolutionary Guards. A massive military buildup of terrifying proportions rarely seen in history has been initiated in the region. Since the ceasefire process, the US military has practically flooded into the region. Exactly 75 different heavy military shipments were made to the Middle East. This incredible logistical operation means piling up 15 million pounds of state-of-the-art weapons in the region. While wasting time at the negotiation table, the Pentagon has already locked its barrels on the target. On one hand, 6 massive US military transport planes are landing in Pakistan for the diplomatic process. These giant C-17 Globemaster transport planes touch down one after another at Pakistan's Nurian Air Base. The Serena and Marriott hotels in Islamabad were transformed into practically impenetrable fortresses for the security of the American delegation. On the other hand, right behind the table, the infrastructure of a military hell is being established, because there is a scene where the button has already been pressed for that devastating second phase of Operation Epic Wrath. The US Navy is putting its deadliest card into play to ruin the IRGC's game. A 10 Thunderbolt aircraft and Apache helicopters have already taken off to send the fast attack craft of the IRGC's Mosquito fleet to the bottom of the ocean. 12 more EA-18G Growler electronic warfare aircraft are being deployed to Israel's Nevatim Air Base. These aircraft are not like ordinary fighter jets. They are technological beasts capable of blinding those air defense systems the IRGC trusts so much in mere seconds. They have the capacity to plunge all radar and communication networks into complete darkness with a single push of a button. When the Growlers take to the sky, Iran's multi-billion-dollar air defense shield will turn into just a useless pile of scrap metal. So where is all this process taking Iran? The answer to this question reveals itself very painfully in the realities on the ground. The Tehran regime can no longer control this military monster it has fed and raised within itself. The system established for years to protect the regime has now evolved into a black hole swallowing that very regime. It seems there is no longer any state hierarchy left in the country to implement the decisions of a Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Those terrifying strategic mistakes made by the Revolutionary Guards are bringing the country closer to its end step by step. That blind stubbornness and never-ending militaristic ambitions are dragging Iran into a dark abyss of no return. The IRGC dreams of completely overthrowing the civilian government and becoming the sole and absolute ruler of the country. But in reality, for the sake of this dream, they are systematically dismantling the entire foundation of that country. They are leaving behind neither an economy to manage nor a public to remain loyal to them. Outside, a massive and furious American war machine is waiting, with its barrels turned towards Iran. Inside, the anger of millions of people struggling with hunger, poverty, and oppression is boiling like a volcano. Political elites are fighting a ruthless power struggle among themselves. It's not just commercial ships sinking in those mind waters of Hormuz, but an entire future for Iran. Before us is a state whose economy is paralyzed and which has completely lost the trust of its people. Furthermore, they have come head-to-head with the world's greatest military power in the ocean. The survival chances of such a cornered structure now depend on miracles. Yet, while the command echelon of the Revolutionary Guards shouts victory cries detached from the realities of the country, they are actually inflicting the greatest defeat upon their own people. This suicidal strategy they enforce under the guise of resistance is paving the way for the end of the regime. This unprecedented intoxication with power is laying the groundwork for one of the greatest state collapses in modern history. The personal ambitions of a handful of radical IRGC commanders are uprooting an entire civilization. This unnecessary stubbornness that started in the Strait of Hormuz has long surpassed the boundaries of a regional crisis. This is now the story of a state brutally pulling its own plug with its own hands. It seems history will record this era not as an epic of heroism, but as the clearest example of how a state was torn apart by the betrayal from within. In the fire they set to seize complete power, the Revolutionary Guards are reducing the country to ashes as well. At the end of the day, there might not even be a country left to govern, or to wave a flag over. Iran's fate is not being determined at the fancy tables of Washington or at international summits. That fate is being written in this relentless internal struggle right in the highest echelons of Tehran. And the bill for this war will not be footed by the commanders, but by the innocent people on the streets, as always. And unfortunately, whoever the winner of this war is, the loser seems very clearly evident already. So, what do you think about this historical breaking point? Will this dangerous game where the Revolutionary Guards take their own country hostage bring about Iran's absolute collapse? Or will the civilian administration be able to save the country from this abyss with a final scramble? Furthermore, facing this massive war machine that the US has piled into the region, do you think a state shattered from within has any chance of survival? Let's meet in the comments. Don't forget to share your thoughts with us. Presented by TGN. Thank you for choosing us.